Oh, well, hey, everybody. Happy Innovate Conference. My name is Jon Taylor. I'm with the Jackson Energy Authority. And today I'll be presenting along with my coworker, Ellie. And we're going to be talking to you a little bit about what we've done with the electric division in Cityworks.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ellie Maclin. I'm a business systems analyst along with Jon at JEA and our Cityworks administrator. So I will turn it back over to Jon. We're going to turn our cameras off, share out my screen with you, and off we go. Jon's going to start us off with a little discussion about our GIS architecture, and then I'll take you through some of the pieces of the project for the electric division.
Thanks, Ellie. I appreciate that. And just a quick little introduction here, a little overview about Jackson Energy Authority. We are a multi-utility. We're located in West Tennessee. We're about halfway between Memphis and Nashville. And we service, the primary service area that we have is Madison County. Our customer counts range depending on the utility that you're talking about. So we do have a electric division that's roughly 34,000 customers. Our gas and wastewater division, also roughly mid 30,000 customers. And we do have a fiber to the home implementation that is, last that I heard, I want to say we were in the mid 20s as far as customers. So we don't hit the same footprint. We have a slightly varied footprint for each division. So anyway, with that, we'll get on into this a little bit. Now, I wanted to talk to you about the electric pilot. And of course, the questions that we were wanting to kind of bring to you were, why did you do it? Why did you do it now? Well, so JEA has been doing standard typical utilities approaches to work since the late 90s, and those ways of doing work really hadn't changed in all that time, even though we brought in GIS and some other systems. We had a lot of power, a lot of capability, and the same old way of doing things. So that was one of the big reasons why we would start doing this now. Of course, we had our bills of material in one system, and along with our CUs, assemblies, our records of assets. So those all went into one system. Accounting has their systems, then there's GIS, all these things not really talking together, processes that were different. So we wanted to be able to bring our work back in a little bit more cohesive fashion to the office. And part of that is obviously going to be our Cityworks system. And the other divisions had gone live prior to electric. So we had gas and, well, actually our first divisions to go live were water and wastewater. They went live, and gas closely followed along with them because they saw some real advantages, if you will, towards how they performed inspections. And they had some very important, outstanding inspections that they wanted to start to capture a lot simpler and a lot more effectively. And so those three divisions, well, they just kind of influenced the electric division. Let's just call it what it was. It was peer pressure. Really, it was just peer pressure. So no, the electric guys finally caved, and they started off with Cityworks. I want to say it was in the 2000 and help me, Ellie, was it 2018, I think?
2018. So we first started looking at the pilot end of 2017, but we started pushing things into production early and middle 2018.
Okay. All right. So there we go. And so we went and got started with the electric system. And as we got into it, just a little background here, I wanted to bring you some GIS architecture. First off, we are an ArcFM shop. And as an ArcFM shop, we're also running standardized on Microsoft products. So we have a SQL Server database environment, and right now that database environment is SQL Server 2014. If you're looking at the slide, there's an asterisk on there, and that's just to indicate it is going to change. That's what it is right at this moment. And the current GIS environment is ArcGIS 10.2.1 for desktop and 10.5.1 for ArcGIS server. So soon, coming up in just a few weeks, actually, we're going to be rolling out ArcGIS server 10.7.1 and with a desktop environment of 10.6.1. And we're going to upgrade the SQL database to 2017. So we're going to be bringing ourselves a lot further into the current supported environment. The reason we're not going any higher for our ArcGIS environment upgrade, especially for desktop, is our current Cityworks implementation is the 15.4.4 version. And because of that, we didn't want to have to get into an upgrade where we had to upgrade Cityworks and GIS at the same time, because that would have resulted in many IT people pulling most of their hair out. And I'm almost bald already, so we didn't need that really happening at that time. Once we upgrade to 10.6.1 desktop, we'll go ahead and we'll upgrade our Cityworks appropriately and continue to bring ourselves more into the current environment. So with that, we'll get on down the line here. And thanks, Ellie. So this is a little view of some of the complexity that we've got under the hood for our GIS environment. This is only the electric data set. It's got plenty of normal feature classes, plenty of normal object classes, relationship, and everything. The interesting part about our database is every single utility we have, plus some other supporting data, is in the same enterprise geodatabase. And that's great because it turns out we're supposed to have been doing that all along. We did that initially, and so we're pretty used to it. What you don't see is the gas data set, the fiber to the home data set, the water data set, the wastewater data set, ad nauseum, lots of data sets. So anyway, it's all good. So we got into the service design planning for this. And as we were discussing with our electric stakeholders, they really brought back only one main big request for us. And that was, man, keep it super easy. But they did say, please. And so we knew that we needed to follow through on that for them. So anyway, we did our best to do that. This slide that you're viewing now is just sort of a compendium of the different iterations as we've grown the electric environment. But at the left is a REST description for our initial electric rollout, and it has one feature class. That one feature class is our electric lights, and we just split that feature class based on whether they were a facility status of active or a facility status of inactive. And that really was going to help our electric light crews to know what they were doing with the asset in the field. And as they learned Cityworks, then they would grow that effort accordingly. And so, as you can see on the right-hand side, we have come quite a bit further. There are plenty of features that we're now dealing with in Cityworks on the electric end of things, but it just had to start somewhere. So we started with it as simply as we could. So we began with the Cityworks security light environment and those street light service requests, security lights. We knew the crews were going to be working at night to help that out. We added complexity after they were used to it. And I think ultimately, one of the big things that I wanted to bring out, one of the big things that our electric people were appreciative of is that the team that was rolling this Cityworks environment out for them was that team listened. They listened to what they needed. They listened to what their desire was to help them get into this system and understand it and take them one step at a time instead of forcing them to drink from a fire hose. And with that, I'll hand it over to Ellie.
Thanks, John. So I just want to take you through a little bit of our project design, the work that we did to set up first an electric pilot and then a larger rollout for the electric division. Now, there are a few things that we knew early on from our stakeholder meetings that we wanted to focus on. We needed to improve our work tracking and our record keeping for the electric division. We had to provide the same or better visibility for billing and our customer service representatives as they were used to seeing. And we needed to better use and improve our GIS asset information and asset tracking. So each of these pieces were important. And if we didn't succeed in these three things, then we really hadn't succeeded. We started early on working on system design. So we did several ride-alongs. We conducted workshops in the office. And the general goal was to understand the work that the crews in the field were doing currently. And by doing that, we were able to understand where their problems were, what they needed to see. And we were able to give them some sense of ownership over the process too. So they felt like they were involved in creating something that would work for them. Once we felt like we had a solid design, we went back and forth a few times with prototypes. So we would set something up, bring it to them, do another ride along and see what broke. So we started designing early and getting it in front of them to let them determine what worked and what didn't. Once we were satisfied with what we had, and this was specifically for light service requests, then we went into the implementation phase. And for that, we really worked with our CSRs and our billing integration. Way back when Water Wastewater originally brought Cityworks on board for Jackson Energy Authority, one of the first things that they decided was that their customer service representatives didn't ever need to be inside Cityworks. We already had a system of record for them that they were used to seeing. So the IT team here designed a system that would use the service request API to create those service requests in Cityworks from the print feature in our existing CIS, or customer information system. So that allowed the CSRs to continue their workflows, and it meant that Cityworks service requests and even some work orders are designed based on what is stored in our CIS or in our asset tracking system. So once we felt satisfied with what we had created, and by we, I don't just mean the IT team, but we had everyone on board and we had approval with that design, then we moved into the testing phase. So first we tested in our dev environment, and then we moved onto the production environment and continued to test there. We undertook training mostly in the production environment, although most of the crews that would be using the system had already seen and worked with them in the earlier development phases. And that user acceptance testing really was key for us. Once they felt comfortable with the system, we canceled test work orders and went through a go live period. And at that point, we had really moved over to support. And what that meant was that we needed to work when our crews worked. So we decided early on that we would start with these few outdoor lighting processes, the service requests that you see at the bottom of the page. Repair security light, repair street light, that residential security light request, and the outdoor lighting turn on and turn off were the pieces that we first started with. These are mostly done by night crews. It's easier to troubleshoot that light when you can see the light come on in the dark. that also meant that our IT resources were available. This was off hours. We knew what we were getting into. And, I got a couple of calls at midnight, but we had trained well. We had folks within the division that were already comfortable with it. So we really used a train the trainer approach. And within about a week, those calls dropped to almost zero. So this is the inspection, and it was tied to a work order that really got our crews on board. And that's it. What you see on the right side of the screen there was the first pain point that was really troublesome to them in the field. This is information that has to be recorded. It's part of our warranty process. And this was either written in a notebook or stored in OneNote or scribbled on the work order. And they knew that they had to have this information, but they did not have a good way to keep track of it. So a few things to emphasize here. If it doesn't work for the guy or gal in the truck, it doesn't work. If your field crews are not going to record the information, if your office staff does not understand how to help them keep up with the information and how to check that things are done correctly, then we don't have solid data to report on, to our upper level decision makers. We have to have the end users engaged in creating that data in the field. Another piece to consider is finding those loose ends, and that really needs to be done early. For us, during our design phase and then during some of our prototype testing, that was really billing and reporting. So folks outside of the electric division needed to be able to see this information. And even if it was just an email, there was a process in place for that until Cityworks came on board. So we had to make sure that we weren't siloing that information in a way that we hadn't intended to. At the same time, you really have to determine who doesn't need to see what. So you're trying to keep things simple for the person in the field. And there's always that fine line between visibility and simplicity. So we worked with individuals and inboxes to make sure that people saw what they needed to see, that they weren't overwhelmed with information that they didn't. Another one of our main goals was to make sure that we were improving our GIS data, that asset information. We have this phenomenal database with its spatial capability, but we aren't as able to pull information out of that data. And Cityworks is helping us to improve that base data so that we can then report off of it. So this is actually the gas valve inspections that had been set up. And this is something that we knew we wanted to do in the electric division. But I think it's really important to note for you guys that we didn't wait until we had perfect base data to get started in Cityworks. We were able to use Cityworks to help improve our asset information. And we're continuing to do this with new processes that we're putting in place today. So we had for electric both a map change form that would be for moving an asset on the map and an asset edit form. And these are for reporting back to our GIS technicians information that needs to be altered in the database. So this is allowing us to improve our data, let's say, for example, for polls, because we knew that we wanted to be attaching work orders to them in the future. And we knew there was some data cleanup that needed to be done. So once we had those teams on board with the electric pilot, with those few work order types and related service requests and inspections, we really started to build the system out. And we did not do this entirely within the IT department. We worked with administrators on the electric side that knew their processes far better than we do. And we actually had a couple of super users, one in wastewater, who was already very familiar with the system and who was in distribution and working side by side with an electric administrator. We trained that electric administrator to be a super user as well. And she actually helped set up most of the distribution service request types. She did a lot of the inspections, and she helped set things up so that the crews would recognize what they needed to record in the system. So we went from just having these few pieces in outdoor lighting to having all our distribution service request types, several types of work attached to poles, our right-of-ways, and some of our cyclical repeating maintenance inspections, all handled inside Cityworks. And we've begun reporting some information back on what's done, what's not done. We do have some exception reporting in place, and this is another piece that's really important. It's making sure that you catch those outliers. So if, for example, we have an asset that's been decommissioned, but the next cyclical inspection in Cityworks is still available there, we now have a process in place to make sure that that inspection is canceled. And we do have some next steps. So we were very pleased with the work that we've done to date. There's always some cleanup to do, and that's what admins should do. At the same time, we're working toward expanding the information and the work types that we have in Cityworks. And part of that's related to JEA as a multi-utility. So we started within the electric division itself, but we also have other divisions that interact and interface with the electric division. For example, our meter shop. So we're adding recloser orders and electric meter testing. My first design meeting on that is coming up next week. And we're continuing to work on data visualization and reporting. So now that we're collecting all this new data, we're starting to look at how we can use it to help our engineers and our executives make better decisions. So here are some takeaways for us. We started with our tin can and a string, and we do feel like we've moved into the 21st century here. We've seen about a 70% reduction in paper. We feel like we're saving at least about $81K annually just in truck rolls for, number one, meter rechecks if something seems out of place. And number two, actually having crews come back to pick up paper orders from the office several times a day. In addition to that, we had at least 2 people managing, tracking, disseminating information for all of these inspections. And a couple of our administrators feel like they're saving as much as 4 to 6 weeks of work every year. One of my superintendents actually said it's really hard to put a value on what we're missing, but we didn't know that we were missing. There are cases where we know we have better tracking. We know things aren't falling through the cracks. We can see when a particular asset was last inspected and when it's due again. We don't know how many times we missed that in the past. I had one of our superintendents say to us that bad data is really worse than no data, to not know what's accurate and what's not. So the pieces that we're putting in place in terms of quality control, I think are really going to become vitally important over the next 5 years to make sure that the data we're reporting from is better even than it is today. It's another lessons learned for us is that for a multi-utility, parallel processes are really important. So if something is done one way by one division in distribution, for example, it should be done in a similar way by another division whenever you can. Now, obviously electric, gas, and water, wastewater have very different processes, and you have to design for each. But if you have, for example, a Tennessee One call and you have somebody in one division show someone in another division what they do, you want to make sure that there's not a miscommunication that results in incorrect work processes. Another thing that was particularly important to us was to design from that GIS record outward. So what that meant is understanding that our base data is solid, that we have a record of every asset that we need, that we know what's active and what's not to the best of our ability. And when we don't, that we build that information into our inspections so that we can improve that information during our daily processes. And it's always important to push the edges of your designs. So again, for us, that was reporting and billing and making sure that other divisions, for example, new accounts, still had access to the information they needed. And this is just a good basic design principle. Give your users some ownership in the process. Get them involved in the design. Start with what they do. They will always know their processes better than you, and they'll know whether what you're designing is actually going to be useful for them or lead to more complexity than they're able to handle with all their other duties. So I'll leave it there. In a recorded format, we're not really able to take questions and answers, but we're both happy to talk with you more about it. So feel free to reach out. Thanks to everyone, and enjoy the rest of the Innovate conference.
I agree. Thanks, Ellie, for doing that. And great job. And I'll pipe in and say, agree. Have a great conference, everybody. We'll see you later.